I'm back with my second week of completing my master's in psychology and what I learned. So this week, it's been insightful. I can't, I'd be lying if I said it's not changing me. Like, learning about my mind, learning about society is definitely having an impact on me as an individual and helping me to understand myself and hence understand other people, which is ultimately the point of psychology. So this week, I guess we'll start with historical psychology. And we learned about Sigmund Freud, and it's definitely a name that I'd heard of, but I didn't really understand his relevance in psychology. So I had the pleasure of learning that this week, and I think what I took away from it was that, well, he's best known as being kind of like one of the fathers of psychoanalysis, which then translated into psychotherapy, which we now know as talking therapy. But actually, he was influenced by other psychologists that had come before him, also other cultures. So it was really interesting to hear about how he had been forms of psychotherapy, talking therapy had existed in like ancient Egypt, for example, in ancient China, as well as some religious practices such as confession. We obviously know the power of talking therapy and how that kind of like free association, being able to talk about things that you're going through and the significance that it has. So it was really good to kind of know that prehistoric context. Alongside that, we obviously studied his theories, and one of them that I believe is closely attached to childhood trauma. So this was his theory around, I can't remember the exact name, but essentially how, as you grow, you excuse me, you develop from a baby up to about 6 years old, and there are different types of, I guess, support that an individual needs along that journey, and if they don't receive it, then they're more likely to suppress emotions that can then lead to fixations later on in life, or that could then manifest into different types of physical or emotional challenges later on in life. I know he faced a lot of criticism in the time that he had made this discovery, and also what was happening in society, particularly when it came to women. But as somebody who's obviously advocating and trying to build solutions for PTSD, I can definitely see the correlation between unresolved childhood trauma and how it then manifests later on in life as PTSD symptoms. So that was really insightful, and it was really good to just kind of make some of those connections. In cognitive psychology, so in cognitive psychology, we're learning about, I guess, some of the key takeaways is really around how machines are made to copy complex human cognition. And I say machines because it's not just computers, there are other types of technological products that are being made to kind of copy how humans think, and a great example is obviously artificial intelligence, AI, general purpose AI, which I will be using as part of my product. But it's not just AI that kind of copies human cognition. There's also like fingerprints, which is, that we have in iPhones, which is kind of like an element that comes from like visual cognition, and there's also like facial recognition as well that we have in our phones. So actually there's a whole range of machines that are being built every day to copy human cognition. So I'm really excited about learning more and developing in this area, because we're living in the AI era, and the more you know, the better you can prepare yourself, and as a founder, the better you can build. And finally, in biological psychology, so this week we've been learning about neurons and kind of like the different elements of neurons, particularly like the action potential and what triggers action potential. So there's a lot of like words that I was familiar with, such as like neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, adrenaline, all of these kind of words that we hear on like an everyday basis and that we take into account to some degree. But what was really useful was to actually learn about how the brain receives dopamine and the different ways to kind of like receive dopamine, the different effects that medications, particularly antidepressants, can have on the body, and how it interacts with the brain. And it can either increase kind of like the particular molecule that you're trying to improve, so for example dopamine, or it can actually decrease the particular molecule and have an effect and block it from functioning in the way that it needs to function. And I'm not going to go into too much detail around the medications because I'm still learning and I don't want to offend anyone. But just personally in my day-to-day, I'm now starting to see what are some of the ways that I can actually increase my dopamine, and what are some of the ways that I can get my brain to do what I want it to do without, I guess, succumbing to some of the more negative things that we are encouraged to do to get our brains working. So for example, a great one would be like, how nicotine increases dopamine, but so does listening to music. So how do you make those small changes to actually be able to have more of a positive impact on your health and well-being, and have the same kind of like response, rather than going down the wrong path that is actually more detrimental. So that was really, really interesting. So so that was week 2. As I said, really insightful, starting to have a lot of change on me and how I think and how I conduct myself. And I think it's also just going to be really pivotal in building the product and how things develop over time. So as I'm excited, still excited, can't wait to learn more, and I'll be back next week with a third video talking about what I've learned studying masters in psychology. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.